Welcome to the Library of Virginia. I'm Sarah Falls, Chief of Researcher Engagement. I'm so pleased and excited to welcome David Poole and Kathy Roberts, who will be discussing David Poole's new book, Trusted Source: How a Virginia Nonprofit Gained Bipartisan Support in an Era of Political Polarization. Poole worked as a newspaper reporter before he launched a one-employee nonprofit in 1997 to shine light on a blind spot in Virginia's campaign finance system. Since then, the Virginia Public Access Project has grown into a trusted resource that addresses some of the most vexing issues of our time: money in politics, the crisis of American newspapers, the fracturing of information sources, and the precipitous erosion of confidence in our institutions. Trusted Source serves as a chronicle of recent Virginia political history, bringing to life key players, elections, and events. Poole is a Florida native whose first job was as a paperboy for the Lakeland Ledger. His dreams of making a living playing baseball went only as far as the JV squad at the University of North Carolina, where he earned a degree in Soviet and Eastern European studies. Poole wrote for newspapers in Lynchburg, Tampa, Florida, and Roanoke before founding VPAP in 1997. He and his wife Claire live here in Richmond. Kathy Roberts, who will moderate tonight's discussion, has more than 26 years of experience in the Virginia General Assembly, where she has served as a trusted consultant and legislative staffer for one senator, 4 delegates, and the House Republican Caucus. Most notably, she served for 7 years as Chief of Staff to House Speaker Bill Howell, playing a key role in shaping legislative strategy and supporting leadership at the highest level. As a part of the Library of Virginia's strategic objective to strengthen civic engagement throughout the Commonwealth, this program will emphasize audience Q&A for an extended dialogue about journalism, politics, and civic interaction. And we will, just for that Q&A, we will have mics that are handheld mics, and we will hand them over to you. So when we get to Q&A, simply raise your hand and we will come to you. The book is available for purchase in the Virginia shop, and a signing will follow the program. So without further ado, I will give it to Kathy and David. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to the library for having us. This is one of my favorite buildings. I just love the lift of it when you walk in, and it's great to be here and see so many friends out there. I'd like to also recognize Paul Brockwell, who's the immediate past chairman of the board, library board, for his role in helping make this evening possible. Thank you, Paul. And also wanted to thank Ashley and Sarah from the staff here to get this thing organized. So I'm going to turn it over here to Kathy now, who I think most people here know who Kathy Roberts is. Kathy, great to be with you.
Thanks so much for having me, David. So I wanted to start by first just checking the room to see how many, by a show of hands, have read the book already. Oh, fair amount. And how many haven't yet but are so excited to read the book? Lots of hands, lots of hands. That's great. So I thought maybe before we got into the book itself, David, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the origin of VPAP. VPAP was about 2 years old when I started at the General Assembly, so I don't really know a world pre-VPAP, fortunately for me. So if you could maybe share a little bit about the origin of the organization would be great.
Sure, thank you. It's the problem we were trying to solve was a gap between the theory of Virginia's campaign finance laws and how it worked in practice. The theory was that disclosure was better than limits. The legislators looked across the Potomac at how things work in the federal elections, and despite all the limits and rules, the money just seemed to flow nonstop. So They said, in Virginia, it's going to be a lot more. We're going to put the money on top of the table and let everybody know. And then the politicians, if they know the public is looking, they'll moderate their behavior and not take too much money from one source or one group. The problem, of course, is the public had no practical way to know what was in all those reports stuffed at the State Board of Elections paper reports. And so to illustrate the problem, we went online in 1997 in June. 6 months later, this is in the book if you've read it, I went down to the General Assembly and went around to see people and ran into Vance Wilkins on the 6th floor. And Vance, of course, at that point, Republicans were basically at parity. They were at parity, but they were being outraised by Democrats 2-1 because the Democrats had their hands on the levers of power. And so he was very aware of how shortchanged his caucus had been by many donors. So he was very excited. He could look himself. He can check this out himself. And he came across a company that had given $10,000 to the Democratic caucus, but only $5,000 to his caucus. So he picked up the phone and he got the lobbyist on the line and he said, blankety, blankety, blank, where's my blankety, blank, $5,000? And what do you think the answer was? He wanted to hear checks in the mail. That's not what he heard. The person said, that's not true. Who told you that? So you had a system that was based on transparency, but you could lie to someone's face and get away with it because there was no reliable, easy to access source of information. And that was the basic premise, the founding story of VPAP.
That's awesome. That's a great story. What inspired you to make the decision to actually write the book?
Well, I wish I could take credit for coming up with the idea of the book. That credit belongs to Bill Leidy, who is chairman of my board at the time I left VPAP in June 2023. He had just written a book, a great book called Capital Secrets, and I guess he thought if he could write a book, anybody else could.
What is your intended audience for this book?
Well, it's the people in this room. No, I mean, it's a good question about the audience. Like, the audience is kind of like VPAP's audience, right? VPAP's audience is intended for the general public, but the core of the audience still is the people who do politics for a living. So I still think I think the audience will probably pretty much reflect the same picture.
Did the book change much between the first draft and the final draft? What was that process like?
Did the book change? It changed quite a bit. I wrote, I started in June. Claire had been retired for 5 or 6 years, and she began to ask me things like, isn't there somewhere you need to be today? So to keep my marriage together, I decided to write a book. And I rented an office space and went there every day. And the initial book was just a traditional organizational history. And I had a chapter called The Three Jasons. I see at least one of the Jasons back here. And then I got it, thanks to Mark Roselle. He put me in touch with his editor at the UVA Press. And I met with her, and she said, there's something here, but you need to rethink this book. She said, you need to emphasize, she said, you need to write these themes with a crayon. And the themes of trust, how VPAP has won trust at a time when no one trusts anything. And the second thing is how you found a sustainable business model to support political information at a time when, unfortunately, newspapers or Andrew, sorry, I'm glad you're at it, man. We need you. Newspapers were in decline, and so So I rewrote the book to bring forth those themes, and then because UVA is an academic press, they assigned two experts to read it. And this, if you're not familiar with this process, there's three acceptable answers. One is, this is great, publish it. The experts never say that. The second one is, this is pretty good. If you would make my suggested changes, it would be great. And then the third one's kind of like, what is this? But they both came back and said the same thing. You need more context of what was happening in Virginia politics during the time that VPAP was. And so that was the hardest of them all, because I had this fabric and I had to weave in all this stuff. And but that added about 15,000 words to the book. So if you've read the book, it's kind of, you might sense a little bit of all three of those things going on in the book at the same time.
What surprised you most about that writing process?
The first was just how your mind plays tricks on you and how you can't remember so many things, and how the mind like smooths out the chronology so that events are kind of, reversed. And I really had to do a lot of research, all the board minutes, just to figure out and remember things. That was the first thing. And the second thing was how much fun the editing process was, and which sounds kind of crazy. But I had a good friend, Laura Moyer. Is she here? A former colleague. She was a former colleague at the Roanoke Times. She's a great line editor, and she told me up front, I'll do this, but I've got one rule. I don't charge friends for this work. I was like, you know how cheap I am? That's great. So, but she had such, if the book sparkles, it's because of her and her sense of humor, and it was just a lot of fun to work with her.
Okay, this might be a little tougher question. So when I started in 1999, I joined the ranks unexpectedly and worked for a member who was a brand new committee chair. And as you know, I got to know you very quickly because I overlapped for 1 month with my predecessor, and one of the first things she taught me about was VPAP. So because I, at the time, was filing the campaign finance reports for my member. So I got to know VPAP very quickly. I'm not great at accounting, so I got to know the people at VPAP very well, very quickly, because I called them with questions nonstop. So as I read your book, which I thought was fantastic, it was when you talked about the major renovations that took place over the years and how VPAP expanded and started offering visuals and some deciphering of those visuals. There was one section in the book where you talked about one of your founding board members had an issue that you had perhaps crossed the line of providing data to actually giving some interpretation or explanation of that data. So I remember vividly a phone call I had with you when you offered your, I'm not sure what the title or the headline was, but it was something to the effect of the road to committee appointments. And I had just been in the meetings where those decisions had been hashed out, and I looked at this graphic and thought, that's not really how it happens. And I remember us having a conversation about that, where I'm sure part of it was my bias that I was bringing to the table. But how, as you all have expanded from, just the data points, what has been the process for you all to migrate that to giving some interpretation of the data points? How have you been able to, as a staff and as a board, been able to keep that bipartisan integrity, but also provide information that people are clamoring for?
And you all thought she was just going to ask me a bunch of softball questions. It's a very good question. And we started doing data visuals, and when we started them in like 2013, our ideal visual was simply a headline and an image. And people would look at it and go, oh yeah, I see that trend. I get it. And so we didn't really want to put any interpretation. We wanted people to interpret themselves. But we found as we went out and met with people that were in like political groups or chambers of commerce, people would often say, hey, I really like those visuals. Pause. But I don't understand most of them. And so, we were trying to present data points so that people could interpret them. But, and we were trying to, we knew we had a strong audience among people who did politics for a living, but we were trying to expand our audience. We were the Virginia Public Access Project. And so we tried to add some scaffolding, and that can be very tricky, as you know, as you found. And I think in that case, we probably, and I take the blame for that, we looked at the data and we made some assumptions without taking into account probably the fact that this is more than a data story. Like there was things done and said in the room that we don't, that explain this, that are beyond the data, that beyond our knowledge. And I think we probably in that case went a little too far.
Maybe share a little bit. I was able to get some insights to that in the book, but maybe for those who haven't read it yet, share a little bit about the process you went through with your board. I know that you worked through some tough things. How did you, and maybe how you all maintain that sort of bipartisanship representation on the board?
Yeah, well, the board, and I've had some great boards, and we've been very careful to have an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And, the really only time we got in trouble is in the start when we didn't quite get the board's participation right. We were kind of, there was one case you'll read about it in the book where I nearly got fired because it was like a group editing exercise, which is a bad idea, instead of having some standards, right? And I'm held to account for those standards. And really the way it works, I don't know if this is in the book, but Albert Pollard was a former delegate from the Northern Neck who has kind of a knack for this kind of thing. He and I just sat down, and the rule was if we were putting a visual out and I had this little feeling that maybe somebody else should look at this, I would go to Albert, and he and I would kind of, through the back and forth, we kind of came up with some guardrails that helped us kind of find the right path. So that's kind of how that came about.
I really benefited from, the book gave me a great overview of some of those questions that I had through the years. David and I have always had a pretty open relationship. We've been very candid with each other through the years, but just some little reservations and things that I had were really put to rest in the book, just having a much better understanding of the overall mission of VPAP, how hard you all worked to maintain that level of integrity and that bipartisanship. So I appreciate you letting me throw you a harder question. So at this point, it's probably be good to open it up to the audience, but is there anything else you wanted to share before we open it up for questions?
No, let's see what folks have.
David, great to see you.
Hey, Carter.
It's so great to see you, and congratulations on this book. I know that this has been a long time coming. Can you expound on your family and how they have helped you through, I'm sure, many long nights crafting your baby, and obviously now that you've gone by for now, what is your hope for the future of VPAP with the new change?
Well, I have to say, people think I can be kind of a jerk, but I can be really emotional too. So, this book, I've always heard people say, that their spouse becomes their first reader. And through this process, I really became dependent on Claire and her judgment. So, thank you, Claire.
Hey, David. David.
Oh, okay. Hey, Chip.
Hey, my question is, I was privileged to work with David down at the Roanoke Times, so this is where this question comes from 30 years ago. Was it hard to go from being an aggressive, some might say kick-ass reporter, whose main concern was his next scoop or maybe his next deadline? Was it hard to go the shift? I always wondered about you when I saw you doing this, to shift from that kind of aggressive, take no prisoners reporter thing. There's a few of those people in here, I think maybe, yeah. To a nonprofit director. It's like becoming like Mr. Rogers, where you're trying to make your next payroll and satisfy your board and not piss people off before you were pissing people off.
Well, thank you, Chip. Yeah, I was. It was hard at times because I saw some things in the data that would make a great story. I still think of it as a reporter. That'd be a great story, but that really wasn't our role, and we really. I really enjoyed the data side of it and kind of making order out of chaos with that. But I also knew that VPAP. I guess Chip, it's this. I don't know if this is going to be a great answer, but we didn't come in like a lot of people in this money and politics space. They're reformers. They're going to come in and say, "You guys are doing it all wrong. We're going to throw the money changers out of the temple. We're going to clean things up." We didn't say that. We just said, "Hey, you want disclosure? Careful what you ask for." No, I mean so our legitimacy depended upon us being accurate, and I put that. I still thought in those terms, but I knew that VPAP would quickly go under if we became some flame-throwing organization. Thanks for the question.
Hey, David.
Hey, Andrew.
I thought one of the real strengths of the book was its self-deprecation and how you explained unanticipated changes in technology, in political polarization, and you candidly disclosed what the board saw as some missteps or when you got out over your skis. What was it like as a longtime journalist to turn VPAP's hallowed transparency on yourself?
Well, thank you. And I think one thing people will learn from this is that I was hardly some visionary. A lot of magical thinking went into VPAP, and we had some lucky breaks. And I was, as you mentioned, in 1996, I came up with the idea. Then Roanoke Times gave me a year's leave of absence. I got a board together. I had a name, kind of a crazy name, but this story is in the book, and I just want to say I'm so happy today. My sister's here. Wellesley, stand up. You don't see any resemblance, do you? So if you've read the book, you know that the Christmas of 1996, I drove to Florida and I got this trepidation growing that I had to take the Times Dispatch's database and the Pilot's database from 1995 and stitch them together. But I had no idea how to do that. Like, I didn't know really anything about databases. And so I get home, and Leslie comes in, and she's a year and a half older than me, and I had to follow her behind her in school. She's really smart. And of course, she's a self-taught expert in Microsoft Fox Pro. And she sits there and writes me all these queries, some which I continue to use for years, to show me what I needed to do. So, Leslie, we probably wouldn't be here if you hadn't done that. So, Andrew, I might have gone way far away from your question, but there were a lot of lucky things that just happened along the way that that made VPAP work, and it made me realize, any successful venture, there's kind of weird things like timing and just luck that are the key, and a lot of support from a lot of great people, many of which are in this room. But anyway, thanks.
Hey, David, Joe Walton. I think I was
Hey, Joe.
one of the first local candidates to file with VPAP in 2006. And so this gentleman that just spoke about your journalism prowess, was it you that I read recently who said no reporter is worth their salt who can't learn to read upside down quickly? Is that
No reporter is what?
worth their salt that hasn't learned to read upside down quickly, like when you're sitting in a desk and reading people's notes? And whatnot?
That's not true. Someone made that up.
Okay. But my main question, actually, though, is talk about the Whipple report and the acquisition of that and the challenges with converting that into Virginia news and having that be, that is something like you just were referring to luck. It would seem like that's something that was pretty fortuitous and pretty lucky. So thoughts on the Whipple report and acquiring that and turning it into Virginia news?
So yeah, VA News is one of those lucky breaks. It came at a time we were trying to be more strategic at VPAP. We actually went out and got a strategic plan. There was nothing in our plan about aggregating news headlines. I mean, it's like this was a purely opportunistic thing that the board realized would be a great opportunity, because one of the things we were most of our information had to do with elections. So if it wasn't election season and there wasn't an election in your locality, then, come back in 2 years, And so the clips gave us something that was a daily touch to people and it appealed to a broader audience. There was a lot more kind of just news junkies in general than political information junkies. So it completely transformed the organization, and it was just a pure stroke of luck.
David, I remember well when all this began, but along the way, when was it you said, yeah, this is going to work. This is doing good. This is doing what it was supposed to do.
Betsy, thanks. It was, I'll answer your question this way. It was very difficult in writing this book to go back and figure out what was motivating me at any particular time. What was, but I think when, we got this grant for like $20,000 at the end of our first year that enabled me to buy a house. All of a sudden I'm no longer a nomadic reporter. I'm in Richmond, but I think the real turning point actually is, and he's sitting right back over there, Chuck Duval. Katie Webb came on the board and said we need to get the lobbyists behind us, and she organized a breakfast meeting at Lemaire, and so there was maybe 20 people there, and at one point Chuck said, "This is what we need to do," and he talked about VPAP as we, and I realized that here was a group of people that were really going to help us take the next step and make it, and that I heard that loud and clear.
Hey, David, congratulations. You've had a huge impact on Virginia politics and journalism, and just amazing. So I'm so glad you've written a book about it. My question is forward-looking, though. How do you expect the age of artificial intelligence to affect VPAP? I
think artificial intelligence is going to present a challenge to us all in everything we do. I see Jason Kostick back there shaking his head. He got us into, he actually got VPAP into artificial intelligence, machine learning. What was it, 2017? 19. Anyway, but all the stuff it does, we humanly check. But I don't know. It's a worrisome thing. And there was a great, I don't know, a great piece I read about kind of how to protect yourself, to make yourself keep thinking, and use artificial intelligence in a way that doesn't just become it thinks for you. But I don't know if VPAP has hired somebody to do that study or they've looked into it. But Chris, any thoughts?
A lot of thoughts.
Well, Christina, thank you for that question. I wish I had a better answer.
David, Bill Lighty here. Wanted to kind of underscore one of the really great stories in there about just how much serendipity there was in the whole process when you were trying to get a meeting with the governor and just couldn't. And then you get on the bus and you sit next to a young lady by the name of Kelly Tomlinson, now Mercer, who was the governor's scheduler. And boom, you had a meeting with the governor. So, when you talk about all the little pieces that had to fall into place to make this happen, but the one constant throughout all of that, whether you call it luck or serendipity or just timing or opportunities, the one constant in all that has been you, and you were able to keep it all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Bill, I don't know if you were here earlier. I didn't see you down there. Kathy asked me, what inspired me to write the book. I said it wasn't my idea. It was yours, and I want to thank you so much for that. It's been a great process, and I think it's a good thing for VPAP.
Well, I only gave you that assignment because I wanted you to stay out of Chris's hair.
It worked.
Hi, David. I'm over here. Could you tell
Megan.
us a little bit about the person you dedicated the book to?
Oh, yeah. I have. Claire's like, it's not dedicated to me. Who is this guy? A lot of you knew Frosty Landon, and Frosty was my editor at the Roanoke Times, and he retired a year before I started VPAP, and he started his own nonprofit, which Megan Ryan now runs, the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. And Frosty did two things for me, and two things for VPAP. Well, many more, but the two main things are, one, he was really successful. He got a whole state agency set up to train people in FOIA and to issue opinions. And I saw that, wow, one person focused on something can make a difference. Maybe I can do the same thing with campaign finance. And the second thing he did was he was like 12 months ahead of me. So if I need how to find an accountant or how to, get health insurance, he had done all these practical things starting a nonprofit. Show me your, I don't know, how to keep minutes. I mean, he was the guy I always just called up and said, Frosty, how do I do this? And he knew how to do it because he had just done it himself. So I really, he gave me the sense that anything's possible.
David, congratulations on the book. When I first encountered VPAP, I'd never seen anything like it. So, and I don't think there was anything like it. And so what you created is something that is truly unique. And my journalism professor told me to use that word very sparingly because it meant there was really nothing else like it. But when I would show that to colleagues in other states that I worked with, they'd never seen anything like it either, and they were amazed at the amount of data and detail that was available. So I have two questions. One of them is, did you ever think about replicating the VPAP model in other states?
No.
Okay. Okay, I hope the second question requires more thought. Now that you've been through this book writing process, do you have an idea for another book?
No. I'd love, I would, if the opportunity presented itself, yeah, I'm waiting for Bill Whitey to tell me what to do next. And, No, but we had a lot of people, I don't know how many people, we called on business people saying, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. You should take this nationwide. And I don't know. The board came to a fork in the road. Betsy Beamer, who had to step out early. Do we go deeper into Virginia, or do we go broader across the nation? And the board decided to really, before that, we hadn't been doing local elections. There weren't a lot of things on our website other than campaign finance. I think what VPAP was successful and is successful because it grew organically out of the state's political culture. And I don't know if that same thing could take root in Nebraska or California or New York. So if it hasn't happened yet, so if it were easy, somebody would have done it by now. Paul.
You've had such a deep familiarity with what works and what doesn't work, how it all works when it comes to campaign finance and lobbyist disclosures over many years. You talked a little bit about how there's a very careful decision to not veer into advocacy. But now that you're retired, and if you were king for a day, what are 3 things that you would want to do automatically if you had no opposition to changing how Virginia's laws work?
I would expropriate the CSX line so my Amtrak trains could be on time. Yeah, that's a really, I want to try to answer the question, but there's probably some stuff in the campaign finance schedule that I think Senator Suderline has had some excellent campaign finance bills, but the PAC filing schedule needs to get fixed again, and I think if I were king for a day, I would just say, right now there's different rules. PACs get a big donation, they have to report it within 72 hours, but candidates cannot. So I would just say anybody, make that universal, instant disclosure for any big transaction like that can move the markets. People should know about it right away. That's not too radical, is it? No. Yes, in the front row, Richmond Times-Dispatch.
You talk in the book, as you just said, that Virginia is unusual in that it's the Wild West. Anything goes as long as you disclose. So VPAP might not be applicable in the same way in other states that have more stringent rules. But given your process over the 25 years, are there any lessons for other states from your experience in VPAP? What would you tell other states as far as disclosure or what you've learned?
And if you've read the book carefully, I kind of address that, and that the advantage that we had at VPAP is we went from 0 to 60. We went from paper to electronic disclosure. A lot of states, the state agencies in VPAP, and Virginia has too, they put stuff online. So it's like 70% there, right? And that's the problem. It's already 70% there. Who's going to pay the marginal difference to get that extra 30? And that's the trick. That was one of the successes of VPAP. We were an early adopter, and we were way ahead of everybody. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer to your question. Sorry.
Does VPAP help in some way to lower the temperature about lower the temperature in sort of our overheated national and state political machinery. Now, I know that there's a lot of, and there's a lot been written by various people sitting close to me about how nationalized Virginia politics has gotten over the years. But I always had an impression that by bringing people from both sides of the aisle together to do something, I hope it helps lower the temperature, but is that naive of me to even ask? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess I try to be optimistic about this. And I like, I don't know if you've seen, I don't know how pervasive it is in the VPAP's marketing now. They're talking about a source of calm and clarity. And I think those are very much needed. Both of those are much needed in this time. I'm not sure how you can tame social media and all the kind of crazy stuff that happens there. But I always feel like VPAP is like a utility. It's like you can, when you need it, you turn the faucet on and it's there. And I was always try to be optimistic that even though you don't always hear from people, that occasionally I would hear from somebody that say, hey, yeah, I figured this out from your website. And there's no way they would have been able to figure it out otherwise. So we talked to some students before this, and I just said one of my big advice is tell them to get off social media and not post anything on social media. Just bring it down a little bit. But old guy like me, they're not going to listen to me.
Hi, David. I'm Whitney Evans. I'm a reporter with VPM. And I'm curious, have you always been strictly tied to campaign finance in terms of your sort of quest for transparency, or are there other areas that you see as like the next frontier in trying to make Virginia a more transparent state? I think about the court system.
Well, I've told Megan Ryan that, forget FOIA, just get everything online. People can just find it, right? You don't have to ask for it. It's just there. I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'd love to see more transparency of the courts. I'd love to know kind of what people who do a crime in Richmond, what they get as compared to the people in Chesterfield or Danville. I just think that would be really interesting. All that data is out there somewhere.
So, David, talking about staying bipartisan and keeping the temperature down, I think part of the success for VPAP is that it was able to diversify its donor base so that nobody was able to tell you or the board what to do. So can you talk about that process? Because it's hard to raise money for nonprofits, and yet VPAP's been extraordinarily successful.
Thank you. That's Larry Roberts, who's former chairman of the board. He came up to me before this, and I tell you, I feel like everybody know who Rick Steves is? I feel like Rick Steves in Barcelona, and every other person walks by with his book. I'm like, wow. So raising money was something, I was really shy as a child. Sarah mentioned that my first job was a paper boy. I was in second grade, and it was an afternoon paper, and it was nothing more fun than riding my bike around the neighborhood, chucking papers in people's driveway. But then I had to go collect, and I was so shy. So Leslie started collecting for me. So she got half of my my pay. But she was not happy because she said, I want to be a paper girl, and they said, no, we don't have, girls can't deliver the paper, right? Now I'm like, I sound like I'm trying to avoid your question. It's just like, I got some really great help trying to, learning how to raise money, but it was really important to always to try to diversify and try to find different revenue sources. So we initially, all our funding came from newspapers at the start. And then we didn't really ask for donations. We started doing services. We ran Virginia Free's website. And I was like, why are we doing that? We were just trying to do it. We were throwing anything up against the wall that would work. And then we started helping us doing the State Board of Elections campaign finance. So at like one point, a third of our money was from the papers, a third of money was from the state board, and a third of money was like services we were providing. So then I took a class with Lori Rogers, who's a great teacher in campaign finance, and she said, the typical nonprofit should have like 75% of their money from individuals. And I went back to the office and we had like 2% from individuals. Like, okay, here's where we can grow it. So, we were very fortunate. If you read the book, we were very fortunate when we hired our first development director. Rick Ehrenstein was a fabulous fundraiser. If I see some people out here who Rick called on, he's a hell of a closer, and did a great job of raising money for us. But I think the key is right, Larry. At some point, people have suggested, you suggest all sorts of things. Maybe we should get a state appropriation, or we should take over stuff at the State Board of Elections and get a line item in the budget. And it's like, boy, once you get a line item in the budget, I see Matt Benedetti shaking his head. It's going to get crossed out. I think that was always a key. We wouldn't have one big donor. And I would go to conferences early on, and people my executive directors at other nonprofits would say, well, what percentage of your money comes from foundations? I'd say, none. And I expected them to go, well, you're a loser. And most of them would say, you're so lucky. And because I'd seen some nonprofits in Roanoke when I was a reporter that kind of had run out of gas, and they were basically just trying to keep themselves in business. They kind of forgot their mission. Their mission was to perpetuate themselves. So anyway.
Hey, David. Congrats again on the book. I can't wait to read it. I'm still waiting on my copy from Amazon, so follow up with you on that. We talk a little bit about the financial disclosures, but I think VPAP is so much more than that. There's district profile and demographics and lobbyist disclosures and statement of economic interest forms. And I'm curious how these features kind of evolved. Were they organically? Did people ask about? And are there features that you didn't quite finish that you wish, are there features down the road that you hope to see within VPAP?
That's a good question. I think when we started with money and politics, and we and that was campaign donations. Like literally, that's all it was. And I soon realized that money gets into politics in a lot of different ways, not just campaign donations. And it was you'll see in the book, it was a bit of a struggle to get the board to agree to add some of these things. And part of the reservation was, David, how many plates can you spin? I was always ready for the next thing, and for many years I was the only employee, and I think part of it, they just wanted to recognize my limitations, right? But there's also I think people generally love VPAP, but there have been some in the lobbying community who would rather see us as a B2B service, kind of like Virginia Free used to be. So in other words, they could avail themselves of our information, but without having to involve the public. And I resisted that, and I think it's human nature that when the light shines a dark corner, to look in that corner, but when the light shines on you, you're like, ugh. And I think there were some lobbyists who weren't really comfortable about putting lobbyist disclosures on the website. She's left, but Betsy Beamer was the key to kind of, okay, let's have a plan. And the breakthrough was we were we were stagnant. We needed to raise more money. We came up with what's called a 3-year plan, and we went to lobbyists and companies and said, if we do these more things, will you give us more? And they said yes, and that was part of this package that people would support it. So that happened in about 2010, I think. I don't know. Jason, does that sound right? Yep. Right.
This piggybacks a little bit on to that previous question. You've had the Sunshine Caucus, a lot of buy-in from many legislators, but I'm curious about any legislators who have made a special pushback and maybe some choice words that they may have had along the way.
I don't see any of them here, so no. Kathy, you want, you can jump in here and tell us kind of what Veep, as an employee, we got into the legislators' pockets through their legislative aides.
I will say that I did have sort of a behind closed doors opportunity to listen to some of the, concerns with some of the information that was posted. I've worked for multiple members, so you won't know who I'm talking about. But, I think there was at times concerns about, and this is what I was addressing a little bit earlier, once it got passed, once VPAP expanded beyond just putting who gave what money and started deciphering some other things, and the book really does a good job of explaining that process and how they really worked at maintaining bipartisanship, trying to provide the dots but not connect the dots for people, letting people connect their own dots. I think some of the rub was at times, I was always very open with David when I felt this way, and I did hear some members worry that they were connecting the dots too much. So I won't call anybody out, but I think the staff, I truly don't think I could have done my job effectively or nearly as effectively without VPAP. I saw the worth in it immediately, and I know that consensus was very strong. So I think what happened as the organization evolved and the information evolved was they had a tough job of figuring out how do we balance this with continuing to shine light and not, alienating the members and their staff. But I think if overall they did that very effectively. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Megan, I kind of pulled some punches in the book. I didn't name some names, and there are a few VPAP haters out there, and I didn't really dwell on that.
I do think that they are, in general, far fewer than those who really do support VPAP's mission, though, in my experience.
Good evening. My name is Belinda. I'm a BCU student, and I work for the Commonwealth Times. I was wondering, having experience in journalism and reporting, what are some challenging faces in local journalism? And also, do you see a struggle in transparency in local journalism now?
Thank you, and thank you for being a journalist. So I hope you'll take the Capital Semester class. I guess they still do that and come down to the General Assembly. I think there's in terms of transparency of local of nonprofit journalism, it's generally pretty good. Particularly, I know I worked for the Richmonder, and they list all their donors. So does Cardinal News, and I think that's and that's the VPAP. We always practice what we preached. How can we shine a light on candidates' finances and not be completely transparent about where our money came from? and we didn't accept anonymous donations. It's tough because, and this is what I tell my journalism friends, and I'm thinking about newspapers right now, which did the bulk of local reporting. I mean, like basically the TV stations would just read the paper and that would be their assignment sheet. That newspapers were never in the news business. Newspapers were in broad market advertising business. The newsroom was a cost center, and journalism was a hobby that they could afford. And once the internet came in and destroyed their business model of advertising, they've just, the only way the newspapers can survive is to cut. If your revenue is falling year by year, the only way you can remain profitable is to continue to cut and cut and cut. And so that's the challenge. But there's new forms popping up, and we'll see where that leads. Maybe you can get a Substack going. Yeah, well, stay at it. Thank you.
I actually, interestingly enough, David Poole was one of my high school baseball coaches. I was also a former lobbyist. This is Doug Webster, by the way. And one of the questions that I kind of think macro when I think about these sorts of things is, if you could, can you tell us just a little bit about kind of how Virginia's political tradition and the concept of the Virginia way either helped or hindered the formation and the gestation of VPAP?
Yeah, the Virginia way, that's got a lot of different meanings, but I mean, might not go there. But the Virginia way and money was unlimited donations, and that was really, that created the need, right? If politicians can take unlimited donations, the public needs to know, it has the right to know, and that really was, made VPAP great. And some people have criticized us for that, saying we need limits, and VPAP has basically enabled this system that's unchecked. That's one interpretation of it. It's been great, and I'm glad I have a connection with everybody here, that nearly everybody here, and I want to. This is at my peril to do this, to single out somebody, and I want to single out people. I was the face of VPAP, but really the secret weapon of VPAP, of our success, was Kathy Cashel, who's in the back there. Kathy, stand up, stand up. When I met Kathy, she was a punk rocker who did coding, to support her music habit. And when it came time to do our website, which was a huge ordeal, you'll read in the book, I looked around, and a lot of places, companies that built websites, they were just like commodities, right? They're like treated them like a commodity. And Kathy had worked at the Center for Responsive Politics, now Open Secrets, and she got it, and she had a passion for it, and she worked at incredibly below market rates. So VPAP, we had zero money, but we could afford a website that rocked Kathy. And so I just want to make sure, and she's come the farthest other than Leslie, and I'm going to make sure that she gets her due. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you, David and Kathy, so much tonight for your insights and your thoughtfulness. Thank you, audience, for all the really great Q&A that made for a really rich and engaging conversation. Please join us now in the lobby for a book signing and a final applause.